Hello and welcome to She Who Persisted, the Nasty Podcast. I am your host, Elizabeth, and today we have the second half of our interview with historian Mar Hicks. In this half of the interview, we address contemporary issues facing individuals in the fields of information technology and academia and the intersection of gender, labor, and globalization. Since we're talking about contemporary issues facing information technology, I thought I'd bring up something that actually is going on in the world today, and that is the fact that we have a picture of a black hole. Not just an artist rendering of a black hole, but an actual photograph of a black hole. You might have seen Dr. Katie Bauman. She is one of over 200 researchers who worked hard to be able to come up with a number of algorithms and process enormous amounts of data to come up with this image. Now, Dr. Bauman became kind of the face of the project when she tweeted a photo of herself, or maybe Facebooked a photo of herself, where she was super excited about seeing the first images of a black hole. Understandable. If I was on a team of people who was using an algorithm that I had worked on to find an image of a black hole, I would treat the hell out of that. But because Katie is a 29-year-old woman, is really enthusiastic when she describes her work, she became kind of the PR image of this team. She acknowledged herself that she was not the only person, but she essentially became a really great face for the project. However, because we can't have nice things anymore and because everything turns into a dumpster fire, there was some backlash. There was maybe some misogynist backlash online wherein people talked about how Dr. Bauman didn't do that she wasn't part of the team, that it was really a man who did the project. And I'll admit, there's a man who's the PI on that project, but Katie Bauman contributed to the team that came up with the algorithm and that processed all of the data and who presented that image to the world. There's no reason that we have to take away from someone's accomplishments, especially when she herself admits that she is not the only person who worked on the project and she was one person on a team. But she does explain her research in a way that is really accessible for people. And she's going to be starting as an assistant professor in the fall, and that university and those students are lucky to have her. Thank you, Dr. Bauman, for the work that you're doing, for putting a humanizing face on technology and explaining your research in a way that makes it accessible for everyone. And for the haters out there, screw them. They are not worth your time. This transitions very well into the conversation that I had with Mar Hicks on issues confronting women and people who are othered by the information technology field today. I hope you enjoy the interview and stay nasty.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
So let's turn a little bit to some contemporary issues in women in technology.
Sure.
So as an expert, I would consider you an expert in the topic of women in computing and women technology. You've actually spoken on campuses of some of these tech companies about issues related to the treatment of women, maybe, in these IT companies.
Yep.
So whether it's sexual harassment or generally like a hostile work environment, obviously this isn't a new phenomenon, but is there a difference now? Is it entirely a like Me Too Time's Up issue, or is there a difference? What do you see?
Sure. So you mean like, is there a difference between when I started to these talking at these tech companies a couple of years ago and now, or historically and now?
Yes, both.
Okay. Cool. So there's definitely differences historically between, then and now, because now we actually, in the UK and in the United States and many other countries, we have laws that say you're not allowed to pay people who are doing the same job less on the basis of gender or on the basis of race. That's no longer something that we think is culturally or legally okay.
Though we know that it happens.
Exactly. However, it still happens. Even, even the most privileged workers in the workforce, so like let's say white women who are working in tech and white collar jobs, even those women are making significantly less than their male peers in the aggregate, and usually also as individuals. This all blew up recently, with the Google walkout and women at Google advocating for pay equity, and Google just being like, we're not going to be transparent about that, and we're not even going to comply with, the U.S. government tried to get this information from Google so that they could confirm or bring charges for violating the law. And Google literally said it will cost us, I don't know, like $100,000 to collect that data. I guess Google's not good at like collecting data. And
I'm sure they actually use ADP as their like pay. ADP could probably get that information for them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring this up because, over the past few years, and actually just recently, earlier this week, Google was talking about these kind of gender pay disparities, and data came out about this. And it showed that, I guess, women were actually being paid more. And I'm not really sure how that works because they said, I think that the article said that they were giving women like discretionary money, more discretionary money than men. And maybe this was to make up for the gap that existed in their base pay. But it seems fishy to me.
Okay. Wow. So that just came out this week. I'm going to have to pay a little bit more attention. I didn't see that yet. So I can't comment with, full certainty of what's going on. But yes,
sure.
That does seem a little fishy because
right?
Yeah, because the women at Google who have been bringing these complaints, they have obviously been doing their own research, right? They've been obviously going around and collecting salary numbers from all their male peers and figuring out what's going on, because you don't enter into a fight with your employer like this very lightly, especially not when your employer is one of the most powerful corporations on the planet. So I'll have to look into that. But the other thing, just to answer your last question about like how have things changed in the past couple of years. So I actually gave a talk at Google, a couple of years ago now, a few years ago, kind of in the calm before the storm. And at the end of the talk, people were asking, like, what do we do? Like, we don't want it to be bad like this. And women were like, yeah, we're mad. Like, we don't want to be treated like this. What do we do? And I just said, okay, wait, have you turned off the recording? Because I'm going to talk about labor organization right now. And everybody kind of laughed nervously. I think the people who laughed more were the managers. And then I just talked to them about labor organization. And there were so many like saucer wide eyes, like that had never occurred to them. And now when I go to companies to talk, they're talking to me about labor organization. They're telling me about what they're doing or, what they plan to do in terms of labor organization. And that's exactly the direction this needs to go, because as I always try to make clear when I tell people about, my work, labor feminization doesn't just hurt women. It's a de-skilling process that drags down the pay and prestige of everybody in that field, because all of our salaries are tied together. Some people may make more than I do in a similar or the same job, but the lower that management can depress my salary, the lower they can depress yours, even if you're not a woman, even if you're not a person of color. So we're all in this together, and labor organization is a very important part of this.
I'm going to take this out of the technology field, and I'm going to talk about academic jobs for a second.
Okay.
Because I think that this is something that happens in academia as well. Mm-hmm. We have moved from having 70+% of faculty members be tenure line faculty members who have some amount of job security. Mm-hmm. And often with public schools, they at least have, transparency with what they're being paid. And they're being paid, typically a living wage, mm-hmm. and they have benefits. All of that's great. We've gone from that, which was in the 60s and 70s, to now about 70% of the workforce is contingent labor.
Yep.
who is paid significantly less. The national average, I think, per class is about $3,500, $4,000 per class, which is not at all a living wage when you consider the amount of work that they're doing. And they often don't have benefits, or, they have to get benefits through the Affordable Care Act. But the university doesn't provide those benefits. Most of the contingent faculty that you see out there are women.
Yeah.
And so this contingent faculty becomes these kind of pink collar jobs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I don't have the statistics on this, but I think that women and also so white women and people of color, I think they are disproportionately in these jobs, which, as you point out, aren't just lower paid, but there's no job security. They're like, contract jobs that you don't know if you're going to even have them from semester to semester. And a lot of times it's below minimum wage. It's below the poverty line if this is your one source of income. And of course, you would expect it probably would be, because, as you point out, a lot of work goes into this. And it's really, really terrifying because, for one thing, obviously it ruins lives. It wastes so much talent. Like, we've been talking a lot about the waste of technical talent. This is the waste of talent in all fields, and disproportionately also in fields like the humanities, which, as we're starting to understand, well, some of us have always known, right? But more people are starting to understand how important that is to a functioning democratic society, no matter how technologically advanced. In fact, the more technological advances we have, we need the humanities even more in that case. And folks like that are getting paid, like you said, like $2,000 a course. And if you can only teach like 2 courses a semester, which is often the case because the labor market is flooded, that's nothing. That's not anything to live on. And in a broader systemic sense, what this has been doing since the 60s and 70s, is that it's meant that the people who have pay to do research, the people who actually get paid on the tenure track to not just teach but do research, have gotten to such a small number that the research output of our disciplines has just been so terribly hurt. And people end up, they end up doing all this research for their dissertations and then potentially never even publishing it because they aren't able to find a job. And the reason they aren't able to find a job isn't because they're doing anything wrong, and it isn't because they're not needed. It's because way back in the 70s and 80s, university administrators got this great idea that, like, hey, let's run a university like it's a business. Let's run a nonprofit like it should be a profit-making enterprise, or if not profit-making, that it should, that it's not something that we're putting more money into than we're getting out of. And that's an incredibly dangerous way to think about education, that it can be like a for-profit industry, because then you're going to end up basically cutting out the infrastructure that allows so many other things to happen in society. Education is like bridges, education is infrastructure.
Absolutely. And you talk about, this labor organizing, most contingent faculty are too afraid to organize because they, even though their jobs and their pay are crap, that's what they've got and that's what they rely on. And they don't know what else they would do if they're not doing that. Do you see this kind of labor organizing in IT? Do you see that happening?
Yeah. So it's really interesting that there was an instance of the programmers organizing at one company. This is a year or so ago. It was the first instance of programmers organizing and creating a union at this one company it was in DC, actually. It was called Lane Ticks. And right as they were about to kind of finalize, and create their union, they were all summarily fired.
Stop.
Yeah. So you can look this up. But, it's sort of the case that if you're going to try to stamp out an ember, you better be darn sure you're not in the middle of a forest fire, because that just energized more and more people in tech and more people who are interested in helping tech workers, unionize and organize to go after this goal, and to do it in ways that crossed boundaries, both between companies and within companies. So like there's this coalition called the Tech Workers Coalition right now, which is trying to organize people in tech companies from top